KMC HD3 Detroit, KMPS HD3 Seattle, WBMX HD3 Boston,
and on AOL Radio and Yahoo Launchcast. Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Call now 248-545-SOUL. New skyradio.com. Believe.
How will you face death? What if a doctor told you tomorrow that you have terminal cancer? As the meter ticked, would that doctor talk to you about God and or what might follow bodily death?
Hey there, and welcome to the 446th broadcast of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I'm Ben, and those halfway decent, those moderately concise questions came from my co-host and partner in the paranormal, my dad. So continuing our recent fun of sobering topics this evening, we welcome our guest who has first-hand experience with those questions.
Wise guy. Dr. Stephen J. Iacoboni is an oncologist, care advocate, and author of the book The Undying Soul, A Cancer Doctor's Discovery. A 30-year veteran of his field, Dr. Iacoboni is co-director of hematology oncology at the Kennewick General Hospital in Kennewick, Washington. He served his fellowship in medical oncology at the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, where he received the Outstanding Researcher Award and was asked to present his findings to the American Society of Clinical Oncology. In 1989, he co-founded St. Mary's Regional Cancer Center in Washington State, and he practiced there for 16 years. He was appointed medical director of the Kootenai I hope I'm pronouncing these things correctly. Around here, we have nothing more exotic than Boston or Providence. Kootenai Cancer Center in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho in 2001. In 2010, returned to Washington to assume his current post. Beyond his practice, Dr. Iacoboni has appeared on radio and TV across the U.S. on such topics as how the seriously ill should choose a doctor, contrived drug shortages, and bridging the gap between science and spirituality. His website is www.theundyingsoul.com. Also, a video from KVEW-TV is on the net as well. There's a link to that on the Talking Points page at our for this show at BehindTheParanormal.com, our show website. And there we are.
Dr. Steve Iacoboni, welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
Well, thank you, Paul and Ben. It's a real pleasure to be with you this evening.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. So, Doctor, let's start off with something, well, not really easy, but something kind of simple or not simple, depending on how you look at it. So what's it like when you have to tell someone they're going to die?
Well, I'd say it's not kind of work for everybody. And you have to understand that even though I have to say to myself that even though I've had this conversation maybe 5,000 times in my career, it's the first time, or one of the first times for the family members and the first time for the individual. And so you have to be gentle and sensitive and caring, of course. One of the things you have to do is you have to have an intuition for the patient's psyche at the time, and you have to pick the right time to say what you say and how you say it. In fact, the question or the statement is so difficult that many of my colleagues never actually admit it to their patients, which is part of one of the things I talk about or try to get changed is that most oncologists sort of play along in the denial attitude with their patients so that they never have to really have what is obviously a difficult conversation. The death is usually described in the abstract, sort of, if you don't take the chemotherapy, then you'll die, so you better do what I say kind of conversation. It's a hard conversation to have, so I'm not trying to be critical. I'm just saying that it's one that everyone seems to avoid, maybe more than they should. You have to pick the time when the patient is receptive. If the patient is full of denial, it won't do a lot of good to be insistent. So you actually tiptoe up, and you go as far as they let you. So you start with saying, well, you found that you have cancer, and then you wait and see how they respond to that. And then you say it's certain stage, and if it's early stage, then you don't worry about death so much as curing it. But if it's advanced stage, and you say it's advanced stage, and then you wait get the reaction, explain what that means. And then you say, here are the treatment options and so on. And it's a step-by-step process. And then along the way, you may have to stop the conversation, have it again a week or two or a month later, which is why it's so important to gain their patient's trust along the way through your actions, which you prove to them that you care about them and that you're confident and that you're sensitive to their needs. This is something that builds over time. By the time that I get to the point where patients are dying and ready to hear me tell them that, we've bonded very, very deeply. And that makes it immensely easier. It's obviously not the sort of thing you can say very easily in passing to someone who's just met you or just known you for a week or two.
Mm. So how did you decide that you had to go beyond science in dealing with this?
Well, of course, science is wonderful, but it has so far not allowed us to become immortal. No. And so everybody has to face their mortality. And what's unique about oncology is that patients are aware of their impending mortality. If you have heart disease and you're not having a heart attack at the moment, then when you see your cardiologist, he just says, well, here's your cholesterol medicine and your blood pressure medicine, and call me if you get chest pain. But as far as they're concerned, they're never going to have that last infarct, and you don't have to talk about it. And then when they do have their last infarct, it's sudden, and you don't have this lingering situation. Whereas people who are at end-stage cancer know that they're on a sinking ship, and waiting for it to sink takes a while. It may take a month. It may take longer than that. Anyway, so during that time, patients go through a lot of the things that Kubler-Ross described, denial and anger and so on. But in the end, if you're facing your own death and you're fully aware of it, the solution or the answer to that greatest of all existential dilemmas, fashioned by the human race, of course, has been spirituality and religion. I should rephrase that. I believe that the answer to that question is given to us by God, and we receive it from God, and we use it. If you're, I suppose, an agnostic or an atheist, you would say it's something humans created to make themselves feel better. I believe that God is real and that eternal life is real, and that makes it, of course, a lot easier to address our mortality. But this question is, the patients have been your patient for years. You've had them in and out of remission. They trust you more than just about anyone else in the world outside of their family. And then you have to tell them that the science has no more answers and that it's time to meet their maker. And then instead of the way it was 30 years ago, they said, okay, well, I'll call my priest or rabbi or mullah. They ask me what I think. Mm-hmm. And so I finally got drawn into this conversation and realized I couldn't turn my back on them in terms of talking to them about these issues. And I was very reluctant at first, but to my great surprise, my patients really, really love it when I engage them on this because they trust me and they know I'm educated. And it's nice for them to hear from an educated person who they know and trust that faith is real and that they don't have to be sort of shy about it. They can embrace their faith. That's what I encourage them to do.
Oh, that answered the next question almost perfectly. So what was the reaction from other doctors?
Well, a lot of these conversations were held in private, behind closed doors. It was later when I finally realized that I needed to the need was greater than I anticipated, and the response to my spiritual counseling was much more than I anticipated. And I realized it would be worth it, in fact, to write a book so that I could reach more and more people rather than one patient at a time. Because I think the message is a timeless message for the human race and seems to be fading in a time when we might need it most, and certainly cancer patients do. And so I wrote the book, and then after that, of course, then there was some reaction to it. Most doctors don't come right out and tell me what they think, but A lot of them are either feel threatened by it or think it's kind of fringe, or no, they're not wonderfully supportive about it. I can tell you that much.
Well, what do they tell people?
Well,
lots of luck.
Yeah, I hate to say this, but they never really have that conversation telling a patient that they're going to die. They will be giving them chemotherapy until their last breath, saying, "Oh, I've got more chemo for you."
Yeah.
And don't worry, you're not going to die. And if anyone else did that, they'd be arrested for fraud
or malpractice. Yeah.
Medical doctors are allowed to boldly mislead people at their own professional aggrandizement, and they get paid, to give more chemo. It's not like they're doing it for free.
Yeah.
And so they don't want someone like me promoting a message that they should also have to step up and be this sort of spiritual advisor. They don't want any doctor sort of taking on that role, because then it might be demanded of them, and they don't want to do it. Doctors are very peculiar in the sense that they're very rigid in following protocols and doing what the guidelines say, and stepping out of bounds for them is very threatening and way out of their comfort zone. And so they don't like it that I'm doing it. And in fact, I had to leave my last practice because of it.
Really?
The doctors there were not supportive, and I decided I'd be better off if I changed environments.
Interesting. Well, we are coming up on a break. Excuse me, I think I can use a doctor at this point myself. Coming up on a break, you're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on CBS News Sky Radio, and our very interesting guest this evening, Dr. Steve Iacoboni. We will be right back. Stay with us.
Enlighten, empower, enrich. This is CBS Radio's The New Sky. New horizons, no boundaries.
And now let's start. Is this your name or a doctor's eye chart? I'm trying to comprehend you, but I got a dyslexic heart. I ain't dying to offend you, I've got a dyslexic heart. Thanks for the book, now my table is ready. It's a library or a bar. Between the covers, I judge you when ready. I have an angel, half a tar. I'm trying to comprehend you, but I got a dyslexic heart. I am dying to offend you. I've got a dyslexic heart. Do I read you correctly? You need me directly. Help me with this part. Do I date you? Do I hate you? Do I got a dyslexic heart? It keeps swaying. What are you saying? Think about staying, or you just playing, making passes. Well, my heart could use some glasses. Got a dyslexic heart. Do I read you correctly? I I need you directly. Help me with this part. Do I love you? Do I hate you? I got a dyslexic heart.
Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Call now 248-545-SOUL. New skyradio.com. Believe.
Well, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal, and our guest this evening, Dr. Stephen Iacoboni, is talking to us a very fascinating conversation about aspects of dealing with dying when it comes to patients, and do you go beyond simply telling someone that they're going to be dying to ideas of God and the afterlife. So one thing you must inevitably run into, Doctor, is other points of view. Now, before we get to that, you are a senior physician, and you must have other doctors under you, so to speak. Is that correct?
Yes and no. I made the move to my present location so that I could be in a smaller department and be a little more independent. But there are younger doctors in my midst. Hierarchically, I'm the medical director, but, the thing about doctors is if you let them alone and do their thing and they do good work, you don't try and boss them around.
Yeah.
And the other thing is young doctors are a little defensive. They think they know more than you do because they're young and they're out of training and you're an old fogey. And
yeah, been there.
It's somewhat amusing and somewhat interesting, I suppose. I say in my book over and over again that it took me years to get to where I'm at now. And so when I see some of the younger doctors look at me as if I'm a little funky, I just say, well, I was there once, and you'll grow and learn.
Well, the reason for the question was that I wondered if you tried to encourage, in a positive way, others to do as you do and to be honest about these matters when people are terminal.
Well, it is such a delicate subject that it has to come up voluntarily. I actually, the hospital here was so excited about my book that they gave a copy of my book to everyone, all the doctors on the medical staff.
Oh, nice.
200 of them. And so a lot of them I have actually sat down and talked at great length about these things, but I don't like to seem like I'm proselytizing or trying to make myself out as somebody special.
Yeah.
So I don't go knocking on doors saying, "What you think of my book?" The people who are interested will come to me and talk to me about it, and have some very good conversations. And the ones who don't want to talk about it are the ones who don't want to talk about it. And it's a horse and water sort of thing. I can't make them drink, and so they have to come to it when they're ready. A lot of them are, like I said, are still a bit threatened. And also they sort of got their head in the sand. All there is science, and talk about anything else is sort of not appropriate. And the other thing is the younger doctors are really getting brainwashed in a way that wasn't true for me. In that they're coming out of training being told that there's only one right way to do things, and that you can't think for yourself.
Oh,
and so doctors are becoming more and more automatons than they ever were, and so they're not open to free thinking. Some of it's generational. I came of age in the '60s, and of course we were free thinkers.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's interesting because I actually have a friend who he's at Hofstra for studying medicine, and he's exactly like what you just said. He's an atheist, and is like, if you try to tell him otherwise, he just gets angry, like legitimately angry at you. Like it's weird and it's kind of scary, really.
I don't believe in atheists. I think there is any such thing. They may think they are, but anyway. Have you run into people, Doctor, from different traditions who don't believe as you do, or do you kind of feel your way, and as you say, when the time is right, you bring it up even with the patients? Do you find any conflicts in the traditions of the diversity of patients you might run into in a 21st century hospital?
Well, yeah, I'd like to address that. One of the things I want to make very clear is that I do respect the notion that it's not quite appropriate for someone like me to start the conversation. I'm a doctor in an office. I'm not supposed to talk politics, for that matter, religion, unless the patient opens the door. But once they open the door, we can talk about anything. We can talk about hobbies. We can talk politics. We can talk religion. I have patients I'm very fond of, and we have diverse political opinions, and we can joke about it, and that's that. As it turns out, where I've been living and practicing for the past 30 years has been in rural America, where things are fairly traditional, and 90% of my patients, I think, are Christians. And so there isn't a lot of diversity with respect to the people I see and their religious beliefs. But in my book, the book is a collection of stories, and each chapter is a story with a different patient. And I have one story about a patient who's an atheist, and I describe in there the conversations we had. And again, he raised the issues with me because he knew from other patients in the waiting room sort of what kind of conversations we were having, and so he brought it up. And I tried very hard not to. Well, we never argued or anything. He brought it up, and he wanted to know why I thought, and so I told him. And so there's a story about that in there in the book about how I dealt with him and tried to be as supportive as I could. I'm not here to convince anybody of anything unless they want to hear from me. And so that story is a very interesting illustration of that kind of interface. And like I said, I don't start the conversation, but the thing is that the patients here will often just say to me, doctor, we're praying for you, and we have a lot of prayers going on. So they're basically telling me that they're very religious, in which case I wouldn't be stepping on any toes if I brought it up, because they brought it up in the first place. And I was very reluctant at first, but it turned out that that reluctance was not well-founded. Patients actually want that from the doctor. We're all sort of brainwashed into thinking we shouldn't go there. And, of course, there are boundaries and limits, and you can't be, like I said, proselytizing. But you're there to bond with your patient on whatever level they want to bond with you.
Yeah. With the matter of atheists, which I say I don't really believe in, but there are people who think they're atheists, I think. Do you ever run into patients who claim to be atheists and just don't, or do they change, or what's the situation with that? In my own experience, I never ran into a dying patient who was an atheist. But have you?
I want to make a comment about that. The most famous academic atheist in America, W.V.O. Quine, an existential philosopher, who just died, and was sort of the spokesperson in the face of American atheism or Western atheism, said on his deathbed, gee, maybe there is something thereafter.
Yeah.
You can look at Willard von Orman Quine from Harvard. But anyway,
I'll do that.
The story of my book is about a guy who was very atheistic, and I didn't try and convince him of anything, but he kept asking me questions because he was dying. And of course, it's not like you said. Most atheists really don't want to be atheists when they're facing death. We live in a society of widespread denial. You don't see people die. You don't see people dying in your home. You don't see people. The plague doesn't come through and kill every fourth person down the block. We haven't had a war that killed a lot of people since Korea. Vietnam, and was it 5,000 or so deaths in the Gulf War is very, very tragic, but that would happen in a bad week in the Pacific Theater.
Sure.
And that was when we had a smaller population, so we just don't assimilate death very well at all, and that's because we don't. It's blocked out of our sight and our mind. When you don't kill your own meat, and meat comes wrapped in a package, you don't even connect the fact that you're eating animal flesh with the fact that you're eating a cheeseburger.
That's true. As a seminary student, I worked in 2 hospitals, ostensibly doing ordinary pastoral work, but I was actually assisting the chaplain with possible possession cases when the doctors simply couldn't arrive at any other conclusion. So I've met many doctors who were people of faith. Now, again, this is 35 years ago or more. Scientists and doctors often have the reputation of being, afraid of God, Is that really true, or is it more so or less today than it was in the past? So in other words, if I were doing the same thing today, I might not even be doing that because there might be fewer doctors of faith, or is that not true?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because it was a different world 30 years ago, and I make a brief comment about that in my book.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we haven't seen the book. I apologize.
Most doctors were very religious and politically conservative up until about 1980 or 1990 or something like that.
Okay.
And then, the secular progressive movement has sort of, been having more and more impact on people, especially in academia. And all doctors come through academia at one level or another. So the degree of atheism among science professors, for example, biology professors, for example, in America is now in the 95%. And so
95%
coming of age, and your professor's an atheist, and he's telling you that you're just a collection of molecules, and you have to get a good grade in order to succeed. You tend to transfer his beliefs onto your own.
Yeah, or at least maybe, I know Ben has a question, but I just wanted to make an observation.
No, go for it.
And it's funny because atheism, in the way I understand it, my advanced degree is in philosophy, so maybe I like to think I have a handle on this kind of thing. That atheism is really the last holdout of a kind of discredited scientific materialism that quantum mechanics has really pretty much blown out of the water. And I've had atheists come to some of our lectures and things, and I always respect people, but I think that they come across to me as very sad. I can't think of a better word. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm being unfair, but I just...
Well, if your life is made up of essentially tiny little Legos, I mean, that's kind of depressing.
Yeah, I suppose it is, but I find it very ironic that in science today, or medicine in particular, where you're dealing with life and death, the issue would become perhaps more prominent. That is, there would be more atheists, even in the face of the findings of modern physics. I mean, there are physicists who are talking about God now. It might not be the God of theology, but it's at least they're kind of getting there. And I don't know. It's strange.
Well, I can give you a very specific answer to your point. There have been what's happened is that the physicists have come around. Earlier in the 20th century, they were the atheists, and then with the quantum revolution, they changed their mind. But the biologists, who weren't much of anything until the latter part of the 20th century, they don't they haven't gone through the transformation that the physicists have gone through. And as far as they're concerned, quantum mechanics has nothing to do with them. You don't have to study quantum mechanics to become a biologist.
Right.
You may or may not
this is the problem with over-specialization.
But you don't. Most biologists are atheists, or at least they say so when you survey them, and they don't know. They don't understand quantum physics and why it has demolished atheism. So they're just living in this world. And I've read a very, very good essay by an older biologist who wrote an essay saying, "Look, the biologists haven't figured this out yet. They're 100 years behind physics. They're all still in this atheism phase that physics was, and they need to get out of it." But they won't, because they're professors like Richard Dawkins and E.O. Wilson and so on, who write books constantly about how life is just a collection of molecules. They believe it, and it is very sad.
It's like being back in the 18th century, for heaven's sake. Okay, well, we're coming up on another break. And I'm glad I haven't had to interrupt the doctor once.
Yeah.
Answers are well spaced. But in any case, you're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on CBS News Sky Radio. We'll be right back with Dr. Steve Iacoboni, so stick with us.
Enlighten, empower, enrich. This is CBS Radio's The New Sky. New horizons, no boundaries.
Drove downtown in the rain, 9:30 on a Tuesday night, just to check out the late night record shop. Call it impulsive, call it compulsive, call it insane. But when I'm surrounded, I just can't stop. It's a matter of instinct, it's a matter of conditioning, a matter of fact. You can call me Pavlov, dog. ring a bell and I'll salivate. How'd you like that? Dr. Landy, tell me you're not just a pedagogue, 'cause right now I'm lying in bed just like Brian Wilson did. Well, I'm lying in bed just like Brian Wilson did. Oh. So I'm lying here just staring at the ceiling tiles, and I'm thinking about what I think about. Just listening and re-listening, smiley smile, and I'm wondering if this is some kind of creative drought, because I'm lying in bed just like Brian Wilson did. Well, I'm lying in bed just like Brian Wilson did. Whoa. And if you want to find me, I'll be out in the sandbars, just wondering where the hell all the love is gone. I'm playing my guitar and building castles in the sun. Whoa, whoa, whoa. And saying fun, fun, fun. I'm lying in bed just like Brian Wilson did. Well, I'm lying in bed just like Brian Wilson did. Whoa. I had a dream that I was 300 pounds. No, I was very high. I floated till I couldn't see the ground. I floated till I couldn't see the ground. Whoa, somebody help me. I couldn't see the ground. Somebody help me. Couldn't see the ground. Somebody help me. Because I'm lying in bed just like Brian Wilson did. Well, I'm lying in bed just like Brian Wilson.
Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Call now 248-545-SOUL. New skyradio.com.
And welcome back. And before we proceed any further, because we are burning up this hour very quickly, I wanted to give Dr. Steve Iacoboni a chance to talk about his book, where you can get it, and his website as well. Take it away, Doc.
Well, thanks. The book is The Undying Soul, A Cancer Doctor's Discovery. I published it 3 years ago. I self-published it because I wanted to have control over it and spend more money in the process. You can learn all about it at my website, which is theundyingsoul.com, all one word. I have blogs there and some video and excerpts from the book and some excerpts from the chapters. Listeners and readers can email me from the website. I'm happy to get your emails. I love getting those and responding to those. The book is I went through a lot of evolutions because I wasn't a professional writer. I just knew I had to write it, and so I had a number of editors, and I finally realized that the way to communicate with people is through stories rather than through lectures or through telling them anything.
Yes.
So the book is a collection of, each chapter is a story about a part of my career, usually focusing on one patient and how I responded to the patient's illness and how the patient dealt with their illness. And the first few chapters have me as a young atheist doctor. It's one of the points of the book is that I was an atheist. Mm-hmm. I had come through, I went to school in Berkeley in Southern California in the 60s and 70s, and atheism was king among us elite scientists. We had landed on the moon without any difficulty, and science was going to conquer everything, and the last frontier was cancer.
Yeah, we never learned.
I went to the top cancer center in the world, I'd like to say, MD Anderson in Houston, and we were going to cure cancer in a short time. I became a professor, and I realized that MD Anderson's still there and cancer's still there, and 30 years later, there have been a lot of discoveries, but people are still dying of cancer. And the myth of science conquering everything has been proven to be just a myth, and I had to come to grips with that. So each step along the way, I came closer to coming back to my roots. Obviously, with a name like mine, I'm Italian, although I've never been to Italy. And I was a Roman Catholic, but raised and confirmed and so on. And so my patients brought me back. They demanded of me that I interact with them, and at first I was resistant. But their resistance became unbearable. And each chapter talks about how I first didn't resolve it and then did resolve it. And I had patients come along from very exotic places, even though I was in some little town, and teach me things about life and death that I couldn't have learned by myself. And so it's about my epiphany and then what the patient's teaching me. And then as I became enlightened in this sort of way, I applied what I'd learned to my patients in the rest of my career. And what a transformation was for everybody, especially myself, because I no longer had to be tormented by their situation any more than they did. I believe in the soul. I believe that what we were taught by the ancients in all three of the great religions is true. We have a soul that is eternal. There is a God who cares about us, and we're not just a collection of molecules. And so it's a fun book. The book is made to be read quickly because that's what readers demand these days. And it's patient-centered. It's about stories about patients and how they overcame. They may not have overcome physically. Many of them did not survive, but they overcame spiritually, and they died victorious deaths. And that's what taught me that their spirit was real and that the spirit is real. Mm-hmm. So that's the book, The Undying Soul. That was my discovery.
Oh, very good. Can you share with us what might, I suppose, none of these conversations is typical, but what I suppose a conversation might be with someone, when you get to the point of addressing the beyond, the beyond the bodily death issue, exactly what you would say to them. Do you sort of feel your way depending on their own beliefs, or what exactly takes place in the conversation?
Right, I do indeed feel my way. I really feel like it's not my place to try and impose any of my beliefs on anybody, because as a physician, you have a level of authority and power of discourse that puts you at an advantage, and I'm not here to proselytize. So I actually let the patients tell me what they believe, and then I support them. And I have some patients who tell me up front that they have a deep and abiding faith and they have no fear, and I wholeheartedly endorse their beliefs and support them, and they feel very happy that there isn't any sort of conflict between their caregiver and their own belief system, because if I was an atheist and I was harassing them to take more chemo so that they could live another 20 minutes, that wouldn't comport with the fact that they know that they're going to heaven. In other cases, it's a little more subtle than that, but they simply, the conversation may be a lot less specific, but they simply, I try and let them know that I believe that while they are dying, that it's not the end of everything for them, and they take a lot of comfort in my affirmation of the beliefs they've already gotten from their clerics.
Okay.
What's peculiar and unique is that I'm a man of science giving affirmation to what they've heard from their clerics. That's what they really like from me. Mm-hmm. They've got their clerics, most of them, maybe all of them, and they've already been told that they have an eternal soul by their clerics, but that's what clerics do. For a man of science to give affirmation to that is enormously comforting to them, and that's kind of what my role is.
Question, but I was just wondering, I know that in my experience in hospitals, obviously it's quite different from yours, but pastorally, I witnessed what I believed were several very beautiful, what would be called near-death experiences. And these were mostly old people. This was a state hospital, and there were a lot more inpatients than there are today, mostly psychiatric patients, but many of them also had serious difficulties of other kinds and were bedridden. And it was mostly with people like this. Have you ever witnessed what you believe is a near-death experience?
You mean
present when they actually die?
I actually have a chapter in my book about a patient who was very peculiar because he didn't have any fear of death, and he was, and yet he wasn't very religious either. That was what was peculiar about him, and so it turned out that he'd had a near-death experience earlier in life, and so I got to talking about it when he was. I mean, I was his doctor, and I was taking care of his cancer, and he went on for about a year, and then his cancer roared back, and it was time for him. He was, there's nothing more I could do for him, and then he was, unlike a lot of other patients, really, really not at all concerned about the fact that he was laying there on his deathbed, and we talked about it, and he said, remember when I told you about having botulism when I was working on the pipeline in the Arctic 50 years ago? The guy died, and I came back to life, and so I've had a near-death experience, and so I know that the death is not the end, because I've already been there.
Okay.
And, the thing about it was he was very, very, very calm and completely unconcerned about his death in a way that almost no other patients were. And so I had to believe him.
I like that.
So and I wrote that story in the book about him and how unique he was. And then I researched the question, and people who have made it their business to sort of study people who've had near-death experiences, they all say the same thing. That people who've had near-death experiences have no fear of death because they know from their own experience what it is, and it's not bad.
Yeah.
Well, if you think about it, death is the most human experience that we could have.
Well, I think it's a ticket to our survival. In my last book, I write about it as well. Just my experience. I think what is the most deadly thing to our souls? It's boredom. And it seems like, why have the death experience? Because really in the quantum multiverse, you really can't have death because there isn't time, there isn't past and future as we understand it. That's more of a sort of an experience of our consciousness. But I can see why people would feel that way. I like to think that I feel that way because I'm not facing death as far as we know, because any of us get up in the morning, you never know what's going to happen, especially today. But in any case, I do like that story. That's why I even look forward to reading the book even more. We're just about coming up on another break. However, do you want to put, I don't know if you want to.
We already talked about that.
Yeah, we did. All right. Okay. Well, in that case, we still have another minute. So doctor, as far as this particular patient was concerned, but you yourself have not actually witnessed a near-death experience. I mean, I've had I had a man sort of sit up who was paralyzed from the neck down. He was an Irishman. Say in Hebrew, the words were Abba, Ba, and when I learned Hebrew after that, it was it's a very intimate way of saying father. It's like Daddy's coming, and he dropped back down on the pillow peacefully, and that was there we are. So anyway, we're going to take our break. We'll be right back on CBS New Sky Radio, and our very interesting guest, Dr. Steve Iacoboni, author of The Undying Soul, A Cancer Doctor's Discovery. We'll be right back, so stay with us.
Enlighten, empower, enrich. This is CBS Radio's The New Sky. New horizons, no boundaries.
Put on my blue suede shoes and I boarded the plane. Touchdown in the land of the Delta Blues, in the middle of the pouring rain. W.C. Handy, won't you look down over me? Yeah, I got a first-class ticket, but I'm as blue as a boy can be. Then I'm walking in Memphis, walking with my feet 10 feet off a beam. Walking in Memphis, but do I really feel the way I feel? Saw the ghost of Elvis on Union Avenue. Followed him up to the gates of Graceland.
and I watched him walk right through. Now security, they did not see him. They just hovered around his tomb. But there's a pretty little thing waiting for the king down in the jungle room. When I was walking in Memphis, I was walking with my feet 10 feet off a beam. Walking in Memphis, but do I really feel the way I feel? They've got catfish on the table. They've got gospel in the air. And Reverend Green, be glad to see you when you haven't got a prayer. But boy, you got a prayer in Memphis. Now Muriel plays piano every Friday at the Hollywood. And they brought me down to see her, and they asked me if I would do a little number, and I sang with all my might. She said, tell me, are you a Christian child? And I said, ma'am, I am tonight. Walking in Memphis, I was walking with my feet 10 feet off a beam. Walking in Memphis, but do I really feel the way I feel? Walking in Memphis.
Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Call now 248-545-SOUL. New skyradio.com. Believe.
Welcome back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I'm Ben. This one over here is Paul, and with us is Dr. Stephen Iacoboni, and we are talking of the death experience.
Yes, so please go on, as you were saying during the break, Doctor, the learning from the death experience.
Yeah, that was really what turned me around. As I said, the book is laid out. The first few chapters are me as a young, seemingly omnipotent scientist, and yet my patients are dying, and so I can't reconcile that. And so I realize I'm not omnipotent, and science is not omnipotent, and I go searching for answers. That sets the stage for the rest of the book. And I decided to go in private practice, leave academia, so that I could maybe do the search without all the clutter of academia. And I was kind of floundering. I wasn't getting anywhere. And then a patient came into my life in a way that was seemingly quite so improbable that I don't think it was an accident. He came to me from Ukraine. He didn't speak any English, and there was a tiny Russian community in the town I lived in, and he had been exposed to radiation from Chernobyl, and he had leukemia, and he was dying, and Russia did not, at the time, have any way of taking care of him, and so he got a compassionate visa through then Speaker of the House Tom Foley, and wound up in my office. 10,000 miles away, and he never spoke a word of English to me, but he had a profound influence on my life because he was one of the most spiritually pure people I've ever known, and I took care of him for a couple of years until his death, and he and I became very, very close, and so I wrote that chapter in the book, and it was a turning point in my life, professionally and spiritually, because I had a very intense and moving experience the night that he died, and that's described in some detail in the book, where he just died with a smile on his face, and it was a very slow and sort of agonizing death, but he never, ever complained, and he refused to take any narcotics. You know, one of the things that I talk about in the book is that one of the reasons why doctors sort of miss out on the experience of the dying is because people who die slowly are on a morphine drip, and they're out of it. You know, their consciousness is gone until their heart stops beating. Well, he wouldn't allow that, and so he communicated to me while he was dying, without any words, because he didn't speak English, and it's hard. And my Russian isn't very good. I just looked at me. We looked at each other, and I watched the light fade out of his eyes over like about an hour, and I held his hand in the dark. And I didn't hallucinate. I didn't see, his body float out of his corpse. I didn't have any kind of paranormal experience, but it was as real as anything. I felt he wanted me to understand and feel the strength of his faith and his utter fearlessness and his spiritual completeness as he faced death. And that was his gesture to me, because, of course, he didn't pay me a penny for all the work I did. Not that I wanted anything from him.
Yeah.
But he paid me in a way that I could never repay. It's worth more than millions of dollars. He gave me my faith back. He sat there and he held my hand, and he died the perfect death. And when I saw that, my life was changed. And it was then that I knew I had to write the book, although it took a while, to figure it out.
Wow.
Because that still found me. But that book is, in that chapter is sort of the fifth chapter of the book, and it sets the stage for the rest of the book and for my transformation and what I refer to as my discovery.
Have you seen terminally ill patients change based on what you have said to them? I know you don't give yourself credit for it. None of us would. But what kind of difference does the spiritual belief make for them? And have you seen a change like this take place? And in what percentage of patients?
Well, one of the points I make in the book, when you're writing a book, you have to be pretty clear. It has to be pretty straightforward what you're writing about. And so the first part of the book, I'm an atheist. My patients are urban. I'm in Houston or I'm in Los Angeles, different parts of my career. The patients are agnostic, and the death is just miserable. I'm miserable. They're miserable. They don't want to die. They don't know what's going to happen to them. I have no answers. That's the first part of the book.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's only a couple chapters. And then I'm out here in eastern Washington, around in the wheat fields, and most of our patients are Christian churchgoers, because that's the demographic. And one of the things that impressed me was that even among them, there was a lot of fear, a lot of angst. And they wanted me to relieve that. And while I was agnostic, I didn't know how to. And so when I had my Russian patient, whose name was Pavel, which is Russian for Paul,
right?
Once he effected the transformation in me, then I showed a strength of purpose and affirmation in my patients that totally transformed my experience and their experience. We eliminated fear on the oncology board. Eliminates a strong word. We reduced it dramatically. And for patients who wanted me to give them affirmation, I did. And when that happened, there was, fear was a thing of the past. And so it had this dramatic effect on the dying experience. And I finally realized this is the way it's supposed to be. And so I went to all the time and trouble to take the professional risks to write my book, because the message is that important. My wife didn't like it. She knew that it was going to possibly get me in trouble and interrupt my career. But I didn't have a choice. These people had come to me and given me my faith, and I had to repay them. And so that's why I wrote the book. And so I know for a fact that if a patient is, faith is a difficult thing. It's it has to be maintained. It has to be nurtured. You have to believe in the unseen, right? And so if someone says to you, yes, you're right, there are angels waiting for you in heaven, and I'm not a kook, I'm a doctor who's a scientist, then it's easier for them to believe it. And we live in a world that's run by secular philosophy, and so the society doesn't embrace or support them the way it used to 50 years ago.
Yeah.
So my support for them is in many ways invaluable.
Well, we're just about done, but I just wanted to mention that I personally learned early on, maybe you could echo this, that the family really should be involved. I would always advise them, to touch the person, and I would tell them, be there in every possible way according to all the senses the person had left, and that made such a difference in the, if you can call it the quality of the, we don't use the word death on the show. I call it translation. It's an ancient theological term. I think it's much more accurate. So, but anyway, I guess that's just an observation. We're just about done. But Dr. Steve Iacoboni, give us your book and website one more time, if you would, please. With pleasure. It's The Undying Soul, A Cancer Doctor's Discovery. And you can learn more about it at www.theundyingsoul.com.
The book is available on Amazon also, or you can buy it through the website. You can read my blogs. You can read excerpts from the book to see whether you like it. Please email me at author@theundyingsoul.com. You can email me straight from the website. I love getting emails. I have a vibrant conversation going on with my readers, and it's very fulfilling and exciting, and I welcome everyone to participate.
Well, I think you're going to get one from me. I really enjoyed our conversation. Dr. Steve Iacoboni, thank you so much. We'll talk to you again.
Okay, Paul and Ben, thanks a lot. It's been a real pleasure.
Great. Okay. And you can check out not only the doctor's books, but mine and Barnes & Noble Nook and the Kindle, Amazon Kindle e-readers.
All right, so check out our websites, beyondtheparanormal.com, and where you can find nearly 500 free podcasts of our past shows. Also, check out our site at www.newenglandghosts.com, where there are case studies, photos, along with articles by my dad.
And if you buy my books on either of those sites, you will help us keep those podcasts free.
So many thanks to our producer, Brandon Jackson. And you almost stepped on my line. Next week's show will be I heard you get ready for it. It should be a rebroadcast, but we'll see you in 2 weeks, May 19th, when we will welcome back British police officer Gary Heseltine. And we will be talking about UFOs and the police and the recent citizens' hearings on UFO disclosure in Washington.
And in the meantime, tune into our Boston Providence Drive Time show on WOON 1240 AM and onworldwide.com at 6 p.m. Eastern Time every Monday. Check out, again, those podcasts on behindtheparanormal.com. We'll leave you this evening with a thought. I guess we're going to leave right now because we're just about done. All right, we'll save the quote for next week.
Okay.
Thanks for listening, and have a great week.